These last couple months have been kind of crazy for everybody. Things have been changing. Things have been shifting. And life as we knew it, if we think back to March, right, is completely different. I think about March and all the things that I was planning at the time, I was thinking about and I was preparing for spring break, right, or summer, and thinking about summer camp or mission trips in the summer, and all these vacations and these plans, and everything that I once thought that I was planning for, all of a sudden, in about a week's time, began to change and began to shift. And I'm sure there's many stories in here alike, because everybody's kind of walking through this unknown time together. And instantly my life changed, and I think back to kind of how I was back in March, and the way that I am kind of designed. I'm more of an introvert. I'm more of kind of like a homebody, right? And so I love being at home. I love getting to spend time at home. And so my wife would be like, hey, you want to go out to dinner or something? Or, hey, you want to go to the store? And I'm like, no, I'm good just chilling at home. Like, I'm all right hanging here. This is comfortable for me. This is relaxing for me. And now I'm sitting at home, and I'm like, all I want to do is go to Target. All I want to do is just go see a movie. Like, I don't even like Target or Starbucks necessarily, but like, that's what I want to do. I just want to be out, and I want to be active. I want to be around people, right? And it's funny how just a couple months has kind of changed who I am and kind of changed me. And I think back to kind of when everything first started. That first kind of month of kind of being on lockdown or shut down and quarantine, and businesses began to close, and churches began to have to go on to live stream, and all these things began to take place. And I would pray during that time, and I would pray over those next couple months, God, could we just go back to normal? God, could life just begin to be the same as it was? God, could we just begin to go back to the way things were, where we get to go to restaurants freely, where we don't have to wear masks everywhere we go, where we are not constantly cleaning things and doing all this stuff? Could we begin to fellowship with the church again? God, could we begin to do all these things? Could we go back to normal? And during this time, my mindset began to transform. Because I began to think about it, and I began to ask myself, well, why do I want to go back to normal? What was it that was drawing me back there? What was it that was pulling at me to want to be back in March or February, where we had all these freedoms, where we had all these things? And I began to think about it, and I discovered that this word normal, here's what it means. It means the usual, average, or a typical state and condition. And it hit me, because all of a sudden I realized that really what I was praying for, really what I was asking God for, is I was just saying, you know what, God, give me the average. God, give me the typical. God, give me what I'm used to. Don't change the things that I was comfortable with. Don't stretch me in this way. God, just give me what was normal. And He began to shape in me and stretch in me this reality that He is going to use what we are walking through. He is going to use what we are experiencing at this time to give us a new normal. And so that's my challenge for us today. My challenge for us today is to walk through this knowing that God didn't cause any of this to happen, knowing that God didn't mean for harm and hurt to happen, but He's going to use everything that we are experiencing to shape a new normal in our lives. And so that's my challenge for us this morning, is that we would begin to embrace a new normal. If you have your Bibles this morning, I'm going to be reading from Numbers chapter 13, verses 26 through 33. And then in a little bit, I'll also be reading kind of the conclusion of that story of Numbers 14, verses 1 through 9. But this is the story of the Israelites right before they get ready to enter the promised land. They've been wandering through the wilderness. And we come up to a passage in chapter 13, verse 26. And it says this right here. It says, they presented themselves before Moses and Aaron and the whole congregation of the people of Israel in the wilderness. And they reported the congregation and showed them the fruit of the land. And they then told the story of their trip. They, meaning the spies that were sent into the promised land to scout out, to see what it was all about, to see kind of what they were up against at this time. This is the they that they were talking about. In verse 27, it says, we went to the land which you sent us, and oh, does it flow with milk and honey. Just look at the fruit. The only thing is that the people who live there are fierce. Their cities are huge and well fortified. Worse yet, we saw descendants of the giant Anak. Caleb interrupted and called for silence before Moses and said, "Let us go up and take the land now. We can do it. We can do it." Verse 31, it says, "But the others said to them, 'We can't attack these people. They are stronger than we are.' They spread scary rumors among the people of Israel, and they said, 'We scouted the land from one end to the other. The land is huge. It swallows people whole. Everybody we saw there was huge. We saw giants, and among them we felt like grasshoppers. And they looked down on us as if we were grasshoppers.'" You see, in this moment, the people came up against the promise of what God had given to them all those years ago. They were right up against the promised land of what they were wandering for, of what they were searching for. But instead of seeing the promise, these people began to see the problem. They began to see the problem that we were up against. And Caleb, in this verse, in this passage that we just read, instead of seeing the problem, he was reminded of the promise. He said those words, "We can do it." And that's what I want to do today, church. I want to say we can do it. So often we see God working in our lives and we see Him moving in our lives, but we come up against a problem similar to this situation right here, where we come up against something that seems so incomprehensible. It seems like there's giants in front of us, and we begin to look and panic and worry and fear, and we forget about what God has promised to us, which is victory over our situations. And so that's what I want this morning. I want us to accomplish this new normal, knowing that God is bigger than our problems. Before I go any further, I just want to pray this morning real quick. God, thank you so much for bringing us here today. God, thank you so much for the opportunity to share these words that you have placed on my heart. God, I pray right now that we would leave here changed. God, that we would leave here impacted. God, that the words that I speak are not mine, but they are yours. God, we give this service completely to you. In your name we pray. Amen. Amen. I think about everything that's taking place right now, and as weird as this might be to say, I think what better time to be quarantined than the day that we are living in right now. I mean, think about it. Of all the ages that have gone on throughout time, we have so many resources at our hand that allow us to kind of continue in a sense of normalcy, right? Life is completely different. Life is completely changed. But there are things that we are able to kind of keep together because of the day and age that we live in. For example, churches are now meeting online. We may not be able to meet in person, but because of the technologies that are made available to us, we're able to stream to Facebook or to YouTube. We're able to still meet and to still be together, to still worship together. These are because of the time that we're living in, the advances of technology. Or maybe some of you are like me and you've been surviving quarantine, surviving being stuck at home by binge watching Netflix, Hulu, Disney Plus. You've been being able to fill your time with entertainment because of the resources that are made available to us. And even though we're separated, even though we're segregated, we're divided, we can still be together during this time because of all the things that we have accessible to us. And one of those things is this right here: a cell phone, a smartphone. You see, this invention right here is one of the most life-changing inventions ever. You see, any information that I need, I can probably find on here. Any game that I want to play, I can go on here and I can play. Anybody that I want to talk to, I can go and I can text, or I can FaceTime, or I can give them a phone call. All these things are accessible through this little piece of technology right here. Or like I mentioned just a moment ago, one of the other pieces of technology that is really just transformed today is this idea of Netflix, of streaming movies or TV shows right to your living room, right to your house. And in the middle of this quarantine, it's one of the things that has kind of kept me sane, right? Sitting at home and being just kind of in the house and wanting to do something. I've watched many, many shows during this time, and I've enjoyed my time watching Netflix, right? But the thing that I found is that through every great thing that we experience, through every great thing that is invented, there is always a downside. Even though smartphones are great and they're useful and they bring all these resources to our life, there's still a downside. And the downside of smartphones is kind of this. And growing up, we would go to lunches or dinners, and we would kind of look around, and my dad would constantly point out to me maybe the teenagers that were my age at dinner with their parents or at dinner with their friends. And you'd look over and you'd see all of them kind of on their cell phones. And he would constantly remind me, like, hey, they are missing out on an opportunity. They're missing out on memories because they would rather be spending time with the person on the other end of that phone than who they are with. And he would constantly remind me of this, and he would constantly bring me back to say, enjoy the moment of where you're at. Enjoy who you are with. And so I kind of adapted this into my life. And in my life, what happens is I realize that cell phones, while they may ring, while they may buzz, what that means is it's a request for my time. And if I'm in a moment where I'm with my family or I'm making memories, that most of the time I can wait on that, answering that text message. I can wait on answering that phone call. And the downside of technology is what's happened is we now have a resource to tap anybody we want to on the shoulder and say, excuse me. And a lot of times those people give us their undivided attention, no matter who they're with, no matter what they're going through. And they miss out on moments because of the technology that's in their hand. And that's a downside. They give them their full attention just because somebody has their phone number. Or the downside of Netflix is simply this: too many shows, so little time. Except for right now, right? There's like so much time, right? But even if you started back in March and you 24/7 watch Netflix, I don't even think you would reach half of the content that they had on there. There's so much content that they have to stream. Not all of it great, not all of it good, a lot of it just really bad. But there's a lot of shows that you're able to just watch on there because of what Netflix is. And I don't know about you, but sometimes I just feel burdened with the amount of TV that God is calling me to watch. Anybody else? Like you always have like a friend who maybe is pitching you a new show. They're like, hey, I just checked out this new show. You've got to check it out. You've got to watch it. It's right up your alley. My dad and my brother constantly throwing shows at me saying, hey, check this out. Check this out. Me doing the same thing to them. And I just feel like, oh, there's so many shows that I need to watch. And my continue to watch list, there's this section on Netflix, continue to watch, is just massive, right? Because I'm not very good at finishing shows. I'll watch a couple episodes, and then somebody will tell me about another show. I'm like, oh, that sounds good. So then I go and I watch a couple episodes of that show, and then I stop that one because another show came out, and I watched that one for a couple episodes. And so what happens is there's a section called Continue to Watch. And my Continue to Watch list has 6 or 7 different shows in it that are spread out over the last couple months of me watching an episode here and watching an episode there. And what happens is when I go back to want to watch them, I forgot what happened. When I go back to want to watch these TV shows that I watched a couple months ago, I forget what took place. I forget what happened in those episodes. And so one of the downsides that Netflix has, and they've added it to some of their shows, but not all of their shows, is in comparison to when we would watch TV shows like on a week-to-week basis on TV, right? They would give us this thing that was a recap of what happened. And so you'd be watching TV shows live on Monday nights. Let's say you watched a TV show and it came out every Monday night. And what would happen is for the first 30 seconds, for the first minute, for the first 90 seconds, however they scheduled it, they would give you one of these, previously on your TV show. And for me, one of those TV shows was previously on 24. Any 24 fans in here? Yeah, that's a good one. So previously on this TV show, what would happen over these couple seconds is they will give you the things that you need to remember. They will give you the points that happened in previous episodes, the things that you've already experienced, the things that you've already watched, that you've already witnessed. They will remind you of these things. And the purpose of them reminding of you of these things is so that you will be able to experience more in the episode that you're about to partake in. That you will be able to enjoy the experience that you're about to witness. And so the episode that is coming up will relate to all these things that have happened in the past. And you see, had it not been for those couple seconds, we can forget and we can think about that episode and we can not enjoy it as much as we should, or we can be like, oh, well, this is just not going my way. This is not how I remember. This show is not my thing anymore. We can put it to the side. But the reality is, in our life sometimes, we need reminders just like this. You see, we come up to a new episode, a new season in our life, and we come up to it and we forget about the things that have happened in our past. We forget about all the things that have been previously on the life of Austin. All the ways that God has intervened, all the way that God has moved through us, all the ways that He's spoken to us, the ways that He's brought us out of things, brought us through things. And we need to have reminders in our life of all the ways that God has been faithful to us, so that the new episode that we're walking in, we know that we can enjoy it with happiness, with gratitude, knowing that God has never failed us. He never will. He's always going to be there with us. And we can enjoy the experience that we're walking through, even though it might be difficult. Even though it might be difficult. We must remember what we have come through if we're going to be able to step in confidence in our future. If we're going to step out in confidence of what is ahead of us, we must remember what has happened to us, what we have gone through. The reality is that many of us come up against something new, and instead of reminding ourselves of what we've gone through, we think about all the fear, the confusion, the chaos, the stress that we are now up against. And the reality is that many of us during this season, we've gone up against so many different things. Maybe you are a high school student in here, and man, your school has now shut down. Maybe you missed out on a sports season, or you missed out on your last classes, or you missed out on your senior year. Maybe that's you, or maybe your parents, because of this time, man, there's stress in the house and you're going through a divorce. Or maybe some of you in this room, because of this time, you're going through job loss or financial instability. Or maybe some of you are just worried and ready to get out, kind of like I was. I was just ready to go back to a kind of a normal routine. And you're in this season now, and you're constantly just kind of worried. You're constantly thinking, what is next? And all these problems are in front of us, and we think about the problem rather than the promise. Well, continuing in the story of Numbers and the spies that were sent into the promised land, it continues in Numbers 14 in verse 1 through 9. It continues like this. It says, the whole community was in an uproar, wailing all night long. And the people of Israel grumbled against Moses and Aaron, and the entire community was in on it. Why don't we die in Egypt? Why don't we die in the wilderness? Why did God bring us to this country? To kill us? To kill our wives and children? Why don't we just head back to Egypt? Why don't we head back right now? Soon they were all saying this together. Let's pick a new leader and let's head back to Egypt. Moses and Aaron fell on their faces in front of the entire community and gathered them. Joshua, son of Nun, and Caleb, son of Jehoshaphat, members of the scouting party, ripped their clothes off and addressed the assembly, people of Israel. They said, the land we walked through and scouted is a very good land. A very good land indeed. If God is pleased with us, He will lead us into that land, a land that flows, and they say, with milk and honey. He will give it to us. Just do not rebel against God. Do not be afraid of these people. Why? We will have them for lunch. And they have no protection, and God is on our side. Do not be afraid of them. You see, in the middle of this trial, in the middle of this moment, the people had one of those, I want to go back to normal moments. I want to go back to life as the way it was. You see, life for them before was life of slavery, was life of captivity, was life of wandering, of unknowing. And here they are on the edge of their promise, and they say, you know what? It would have been better for us to stay enslaved and stay entrapped, to stay in Egypt. Sure, we might have been tortured, we might have been beaten, some of us might have died, but we wouldn't have this fear in front of us. We would have known, and we would have had a kind of a sense of normalcy about it. And in verse 3, it says, why did the Lord bring us to this land to fall by the swords? Our wives and little ones will become prey. Would it not be better for us to go back to Egypt? You see, what the people did at this time is they drew a conclusion, but they drew the wrong conclusion. They say, God has brought us here to die. God has brought us here for harm. And we have to be careful about the conclusions that we draw. Because you see, previously in the life of the Israelites, what they have experienced is victory after victory. They have seen miracle after miracle and like all these amazing things come to be to get them to this point. But they come up against something else and they say, how are we ever going to do it? And they ask themselves an important question, but they draw the wrong conclusion. They ask, why has God brought us to this land? That's an important question for us to ask. Why has God brought us here right now? Why are we here in this moment? What is there that we can learn? What is there that we can grow in? What is there that we can walk out more confidently through this whole scenario? How can we walk out of here stronger in our relationship with God? Why has God brought us to it? But they draw the wrong conclusion: to die, to suffer. And many of us think, why has God brought us through it? Why are we here right now? And the reality is God is with us in the middle of it. And if we haven't seen the glory of our situation yet, it's because we're in the middle of it. Now, I know I've been talking a lot about kind of our current events, but maybe some of you are here today and there is a different situation that you're walking through. Maybe it's a medical report. Maybe it's a financial report. Maybe it's any number of these things. And you're up against this thing that's causing you stress, that's causing you fear, and that's causing you worry. Let me remind you, God is faithful. And if you haven't seen the glory of it, it's because you're in the middle of it. Let me remind you that the land is good. The land is good. The people say, look at Egypt. Let's go back there. Let's go back there. And I myself was the same way. In the middle of this quarantine, I would say, let's go back to normal. Let's go back to average. Let's go back to mediocre. Let's go back to just kind of the way life was. I don't like things changing. I don't like things shifting. So I'm just going to go back there. And the reality is this, that many of us, anybody in here enjoy movies? Is it just me? Yeah, okay, cool. We enjoy movies. But has anybody ever experienced kind of being in a bad movie, watching a movie that you're like, this is just dumb, right? There's movies out there that we're like, why did they make this? What is the purpose of it? And so maybe you're sitting at home and you've turned it on one of your streaming services, or you're in the movie theater, so you've paid for this dumb movie, right? And you're sitting through it and you've made it about 45 minutes into it, and you're like, I just don't like it. But what do? We sit through it because we paid for it, because we've been sitting all this time, and pride won't let us leave. And we hang on to this hope sometimes that in kind of the last 5 minutes of this movie that's been terrible, the director surely wouldn't write a bad movie. They wouldn't make this script, right? And they make this movie that we think surely there's some restoration or some wholeness at the end of it. Some things that bring it all together that are there. We're like, oh, it all makes sense now. It's so good. And we hold on to this hope that they're going to bring it all around in the last couple minutes. And we're willing to give Hollywood the chance to say, prove me wrong. Prove me wrong. Show me how good you really have in store for me while I sit through this movie that's really not captured my attention. Surely you have a plan. Surely you have a purpose for making this movie after all. And we give them the benefit of the doubt. But when it comes to God, we don't do the same thing always. We think God's brought me this far. My movie's taken a turn. I'm in front of this difficult scenario. I don't understand what's next. I don't understand where it's going. And so, you know what, God? I'm going to turn off the movie, and I'm going to go back to where I was. I'm going to stop the progress that I've made, and I'm going to go back to normal. And we constantly keep looking backwards because we don't give God kind of the trust that we maybe give a movie director. But you see, God works all things out for good. And so knowing that right there, if you know nothing else, God works all things out for good, then doesn't that mean that the end of our movie, what's next, what's ahead, is good? It's good. So we have to trust that in the middle of our situation, in the middle of this moment, that we have to keep pushing forward, that we have to keep on with our movie, that we have to keep on with our life, knowing that God has a plan and He has a purpose ahead of us. And I'm here to tell you this morning that if you remember nothing else, remember that God works all things out for good. So I'm going to be honest real quick. I'm 26 years old, and one of my routines, so to say. Anybody have routines in here? You kind of have something that, like, that's just what you do each and every day, right? Maybe some of you, hopefully all of you, your routine is like you brush your teeth, right? That's a good routine, especially now that we're wearing masks. I think a lot more people are brushing their teeth. Maybe you didn't before, but that's the benefit of masks, right? But I'm 26 years old, and one of the routines that I have in my life is I kind of I put my son to sleep, and maybe it's me and my wife. Maybe she's still up, or maybe she's gone to bed because she works early the next day. But I love to turn on Netflix, and I love to watch one of my favorite shows. I believe it's one of the funniest, one of the most character-driven, well-written shows that has really ever been out there. And some of you may agree with me, and some of you might be wrong. But this show is The Office. Anybody seen The Office in here? Any Office fans in here? Now, it's not comedy for everybody. I know that. It's kind of like this dry humor type of thing, British humor. But I love The Office. And so oftentimes me and my friends, we'll be talking about TV shows. And about a year ago, got brought up The Office. And so we were thinking about an episode, and we're like, well, we can figure it out right here because technology. And so I pulled it up, and I just typed in The Office on Google. And when I typed in The Office on Google, I saw something that kind of just blew my mind. It didn't sit well with me. It made me uneasy. It made me just stressed out, and I couldn't sleep well that night because of it. And you see, on Google, when you type in a TV show, one of kind of the first things that pop up is a review of that TV show, right? And so I typed in The Office, and trust me, they fixed it now. Don't worry. It's much better. But at this point in time, when I typed in The Office, the reviews that I'd gotten had equaled a 6 out of 10 stars. What? My favorite TV show, the TV show that I love to watch an episode every night before I go to bed, and they have a 6 out of 10 star rating. And I'm thinking to myself, surely this was a mistake. Surely the people that have been watching this, that have been experiencing the same thing as me, surely they're missing something, because they didn't even give this a passing grade. I mean, they gave it a D. Like, come on. It's much better than that. At least give it a C. At least give it a 7 out of 10, because this show is at least deserving of that. And you see, even though me and somebody else had the same experience, we had very different outlooks on it. Even though we were watching the same thing, we were going through the same thing, we had very different perspectives on it. Some people thought it was worthy of 6 out of 10, and I think it's worthy of a 10 out of 10. And you see, I think about this, and I reflect on this, and I think this is the exact scenario that Joshua and Caleb are going through in this moment. Joshua and the Caleb went into the land with the 10 other spies. And while they're in this land, they come back to give report. And I imagine them thinking about it and going back to the people of Israel, going back to Moses, going back to Aaron, and saying, man, this is a screaming boy over here. Sorry to call you out. And I think about them going back to their people, talking about how amazing this land was. This land is amazing. It's flowing with milk and honey. There's fruit the size of our head there. There's giants there, but the giants are there because the land is good. Surely giants, man, they could conquer anybody. They could choose anywhere to live, but they've chosen this land. So surely that means something. Man, that's powerful right there, that sometimes giants are in the land because the land is good. Sometimes we're up against something. We're facing something difficult, because the outcome is good. We've got to fight through it. And they're talking about this, and they're thinking about this, going back, and they're getting ready to tell of all the great things that's in store for the people. And they come back, and they hear the 10 other people saying, hey, wait, whoa, that land isn't good. Their walls are too big. The fruit is too big. The people are too big. It's not worth our time. It's not worth our effort. It's not worth our energy. We just need to turn back and go home. And I think about them saying, are you kidding me? Did you experience what we experienced? Did you see what we saw? Did you witness the same thing as us? Because the land, it has all these amazing things, but you're saying it's bad. You're saying it's bad. And I want to be Joshua and Caleb in your life today. Because you see, many of us are walking through this time, through this season of life, experiencing similar things, experiencing similar changes, and each and every day is a new thing. Each and every day is kind of different than the last. But let me just tell you that God is faithful and that the land is good. You see, we can look at it like the 10 other spies and say, the things that we're up against are too difficult. They're too big. They're too great. We need to turn back and we need to go back to February of life how it was. Or we can say, listen, man, life is stressful right now. There's a lot of things changing. There's a lot of things going on. But I'm going to trust God through the process because I know that the outcome is good. I know that the outcome is good. I think back in my office back home. Anybody ever seen one of their cube calendars? Right? So they're like blocks, and on the blocks they have all the numbers 0 through 9 on it, right? And on the other block it has 0 through 9, and then there's a tiny block down below that has each month on it, right? And so you would set it up each day, and you'd put the date on it. And so mine in my office up until a couple weeks ago, probably about a month back, it said March 25th. And the reason it said March 25th is because for me, that's kind of when our church offices kind of shut down. We stopped really going into the office as much. And if we did, it was like one day a week or maybe 2 days a week. It was very seldom because we were staying at home and we were kind of doing the shelter-in-place thing. And so this calendar sat on my bookshelf saying March 25th. And I think for many of us, what's happened in our lives is our mentality has kind of stayed on March 25th. You see, in many ways, it still felt like March to me. In many ways, it still feels like March to me. I feel like we're just getting ready for spring break. I think surely life hasn't just kind of gone and we've been going at this for a couple months. Surely, like everything's kind of just, I'm going to wake up from this dream and everything's going to go back to normal. And my mentality sometimes is still back in March. But as I was going in my office about a month ago and I was turning the calendar back to the proper date, it's almost as if God said to me, hey, listen, mentally, physically you're changing the date, but mentally you're not quite there. You're still thinking about all the ways that life was normal before, and you're still trying to go about things in the normal ways that you did it. And God challenged me in that moment to say, listen, in this season, I didn't cause it. But in this season, if you trust me, I will grow and I will shape you in ways that you never could imagine. I will give you a new normal. I will give you a new way of living. I will give you a new vision, a new life. If you trust me, I will walk with you through it. And I think that's what he's speaking to a lot of us today. I think a lot of us, maybe we are physically like living in it, right? We're living in today's time, but mentally we're still thinking about all the ways that life was normal back in March. We're thinking of all the ways that life was kind of just the same as it was back then. And I think back to March for me, all this really just hit me recently. I think back to the routine that I was in. And routines are good, but sometimes routines are crippling. Sometimes we do things out of routine rather than out of reverence, right? So I might have been praying, I might have been going to church, I might have been reading the Bible, but was I doing it out of a choice or was I doing it out of routine? And you see, what happens is now that life is shifted, life is chaotic, life is constantly changing, we now every day have to make the choice, who are we going to be today? We don't get that safety blanket of routine and normal anymore because every day is new. Every day is a choice. And I think God is challenging maybe some of us today to step in mentally to where we are today. To say, you know what, God, I'm going to trust you wholeheartedly, knowing that every day is a journey. Every day is a choice. And I'm going to make that choice today. I want to close like this. If you're here, if we could just bow our head real quick. If you're here and you would say, man, mentally, I've not quite gotten there. I'm still kind of living in what used to be normal. I'm still in that hope of, man, I want to go back to it. I want to go back to normal. I want to go back to the way things were. But maybe you're here and you felt challenged this morning to say, listen, I'm going to keep going forward. I'm going to keep trusting God. Listen, I don't know how much longer everything's going to go on. I don't know if it's going to be another week, a couple months, however long it may be. But I know that however long it may be, that at the end of it, there's a promise. That through it, there's a faithful God. And that each step is part of the journey. The Israelites wander around the wilderness for 40 years, and they're up against their promise. Maybe it's that situation, or maybe it's a different situation today that you are up against the trial. And today you would say, you know what, God? I've been trusting normalcy too much, and today I choose to trust you. I'm letting go of my safety blanket, and I'm grabbing onto you. If that's you, this is between you and God. Would you just right now in your own words just begin to pray? Begin to just surrender back to Him once again. God, right now we give you control over everything, God. God, right now we admit that we trust you. God, we know that you have a plan and a purpose. God, that you work all things out for your good. God, that while we might walk through difficult times, while we might walk through difficult situations, God, we know that through it, God, you are still working. God, that through it, you still have a plan. God, I pray right now for every individual in this room that you would give us eyes like Joshua and Caleb. God, that while we may be up against a fight, while we may be up against a battle, God, that we would see the promise rather than the problem. God, that we would see the hope rather than the reports. God, there's many reports being thrown at us today. News is constantly changing. Things are constantly shifting. But God, you are never changing and you are never shifting. You are always in control. So may we stop looking at the problems and may we look to you, the promise. God, we give you today. God, today is a new day. Today is a new choice. We move forward from here, trusting that you are completely in control. Completely in control. We love you and we thank you. Let's worship to this.